Black Desert Online, the Korean MMORPG with some of the best action combat systems and some of the most impressive graphics. You already know that, don't you? But wait, do you know how to maximize your FPS and why is it so important in this game? If you don't, then this is the video for you. Let's talk about it in this BDO video. Hello guys, this is Saiyan, and in this video I'm going to share some of my tips to get the most FPS possible in the game without sacrificing too much of the graphic quality. Now, first things first, why is FPS so important in BDO? That's actually because your character's attack speed is related to the FPS. So the higher rate per second you have on frames, the faster your character is going to be attacking, and therefore the faster you're going to deliver damage to your opponent. In this video we're going to go through how to unlock the FPS. We're going to check some window settings. We're going to check some game settings. We're going to save two different profiles, one for PvP and one for PvE. And finally we're going to test the results. So before we go into the video, let me show you my current configuration here. As you can see, we're running at about 100 frames per second, and we are on a 4K resolution. Of course, we're going to have the UI scale on 200, otherwise we would not be able to read anything here. And the idea here is to not sacrifice too much of the graphic quality and still get a pretty decent frame rate. So with that out of the way, let's get started with the video. The first things you're going to notice when you first install the game is that no matter what you try and no matter how powerful is your video card, you won't be able to go over 60 frames per second. That is because the game is actually capped at that frame rate. There is actually some things we can do to release that cap, so let's try and do that right now. So first, to actually see the cap, we're going to go to the character selection. And from there we're going to go to the server selection, and you'll see that the frames are going to top at 60. So server selection, and there we have it, 60 frames per second. At this moment my video card is actually able to deliver more than 60 frames, but since the game is capped, that's all I can get here. So let me show you what we can do in this case. First thing is we're going to go to the NVIDIA control panel, and in here we're going to disable the VSync option, the vertical sync. So that option is here in Manage 3D Settings, and it's this one right here, vertical sync. So if this is on, what it's going to do is the system is going to try and match the frames per second to your actual frame rate on the monitor. So for example, in my case, I play in a smart TV, so I'm capped at 60 Hertz. That means it's only going to have 60 frames per second, and that's all that the system is going to allow the video card to deliver. So we want this off. The second thing we are going to try here is actually going to the game installation folder and search for the blackdesert.exe. So here we're going to go to compatibility mode, and we want to check this option, disable full screen optimizations. In some games this feature actually caps the frames, so we want to disable that. Once we have done both, there's one more thing we can do in the game. We're still at 60 frames per second, so let's log into the game. Let's log into one of our characters. And the last thing we have to change is actually related to how the game is displayed on your computer. So right here under settings, let's go to display settings. And in the game window, we have three options: full screen window, and game window. So both of the Windows options are going to cap you at 60 frames per second as well. But if you choose the full screen, then it's going to release that cap. So let's try that right now. And let's go back to the character selection so you can see the new frame rate displayed on the screen. And as you can see, from the 60 frames we had before, we have capped at almost 150. So that, my friends, is how you unlock the frames per second in this game. Let's talk about Windows settings. So Windows has some features that you can actually tweak to try and get more performance out of the operating system. So let's try and do that now. Let's minimize this. And the first thing we're going to try is the power plan. Windows by default usually comes with the balanced or recommended power plan as the default setting. So this is actually helpful if you're going to be just working or doing some low performance work. But if you're going to do some gaming, then the best option is actually high performance. Make sure you choose this one. And then we're going to check the NVIDIA control panel. In here, we're going to tell Windows to give some priority to performance over quality in the image. So to do that, you have to go to the first option here. Select this third option, use my performance emphasizing, and this one is going to let us choose between performance, balanced, or quality. In this case, quality is going to give us a better looking image, while performance is going to give us more frames per second. As you can see, this image here actually changes when I change the value. So in this case, the change is not that noticeable because I'm in 4K, but people with lower resolutions are actually going to see sharper edges here. So that's something you have to take into consideration. Let's choose performance mode. Let's click on apply. And there we go. Now the other settings we're going to check are here under Manage 3D Settings. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is the power management mode. Now we have to be very careful when we're going to change this, because if you do the changes under global settings, that means that these changes are going to affect not only Black Desert, but any other game that you're playing or any other program that you're running. So what we want to do is actually do these changes under program settings. Here, you will be able to choose Black Desert from the list. If you don't find Black Desert here, you can click on Add, select it from this other list, click on Add Selected Program, and that will bring it to this list. Once you have it here, you'll be able to choose some of these options. So again, we want the VSync off. In power management mode, we want to prefer maximum performance. So we're going to choose that one. In the max frame rate, let's make sure this is off. Otherwise, it's going to try and max out at some specific frame rate that we give it. And finally, under the CUDA GPUs, we want to make sure you have selected your discrete video card here. Some computers have actually an integrated and another discrete video cards, and sometimes it's going to set this option to the integrated one. that's not going to help us at all. So let's make sure it's on the discrete video card. Once you have done all that, click on apply. And that's it. Your Windows is now performing better in Black Desert. The next topic we're going to cover is the game settings, and this is the one that's going to give us the greatest increase in frames per second. So let's take a look at that. We're going to be tweaking the performance settings and the display settings, but in this case what I'm trying to do here is set up my non-PvP profile. So what that means is I want to keep the best image quality possible while trying to maximize the amount of frames that will not affect the display. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to keep this in high and this in remastered, and we're going to be tweaking the other options. So TAA, the anti-alias, if we disable this, we're going to increase a little bit the frames per second, but we actually want to keep this because another of the options we're going to change is going to require this in order to look good. So SSAO, this increases the depth of shadows. I do want that, so we're going to keep it there. Display filter, we're going to keep it there. Faraway objects, we don't really need to see that far, so I'm going to keep this one off. Depth of field, this is actually going to make the background either blurry or sharp. I'm going to keep it the same way. Faraway NPCs, I definitely want this, at least in this profile. And the heat effects, yeah, this is useful, so I'm going to keep it as well. The reduced snow buildup actually only works if there's any snow, and most of the time there isn't, so let's just leave it as it is. Now in optimization, we want to reduce this to 0, because the system is, if you put it here on 60, it's going to try and optimize for 60 frames per second. But that's not our goal here, right? We want way more than that, so I'll just keep this on 0. Now this is the most important option from this set here. One of the most important. So if I upscale this and apply the changes, you're going to see that immediately the FPS will go up. So let's do that now. And we went from 55 to 83. That's a great jump. Now what this is doing is it's actually rendering all the objects in the game in a lower resolution. It's actually lower than 4K. And then it's just stretching the image so it looks better. Now this is why it's important to keep TAA. If you didn't have TAA, then you would see very rough edges around the characters and around everything actually. So we want this option so we can actually use the upscale and keep a good look on the image quality. Now this low power option, if you turn it off, it's going to actually increase the performance. This option is meant for gaming on laptops or something like that, where actually this option will make your battery last longer. But in this case, we don't want this, so we can turn it off. Attack decisions, this basically gives you these small messages whenever you're attacking, like down attack or critical hits. I'm not actually interested in this, and this actually is some extra information that the GPU has to draw, so it's taking some of the capability to display more frames, so I'm going to take that off. Now performance optimization, actually we want this on because it's going to use more resources on your computer. It's going to consume more electricity and use more memory, for example, but those resources are going to be used in more frames, so we also want to keep this one. We might not see an increase until we restart the game, but anyway, let's just keep this one. So effect optimization, this one is an interesting one. You actually have to make a decision here because you can either prioritize effects or prioritize prioritize performance. Now, what does this mean? If you prioritize effects, it means that the effects when someone is fighting you, when someone's using skills, are going to look great. However, all this information, all this visual information is going to reduce the amount of frames. If you go to the other side and prioritize performance, you're actually going to not just decrease the quality of the effects. In some cases, you're going to delete the effects at all. You will not be able to see them. And that's actually kind of a problem. So just imagine you are fighting a wizard and you just walk into an invisible blizzard. That's no good news. So you want to actually consider what would be the best option here. I don't usually move it all the way to this end. I just keep it around here, so I will be able to still see some of the effects and hopefully not get killed by an invisible skill. In character optimization, basically this just lets you see your opponents or any adventurer actually at a farther distance. So in this case, I'm just going to leave it here because that's not very important in this particular profile. And hide other adventurers is actually very helpful on raid bosses, so it's pretty handy. So if you apply this, you're going to notice we just got a few more frames, but we can still get something better here. So let's try and go to the display settings, and let me show you one last option I like to tweak. So this one right here, the crop mode. If you enable this, you're actually going to crop the image and you're going to be able to tell the system how much you want to crop. So let's just apply it so you can see what this does. As you can see, now we have these dark frames on the edges, upper and lower. So here you can actually change how much of that frame is shown and how much is part of the drawing. Now, as you can see, with that, we went all the way up to 120 frames per second. Some people actually don't like this because you're actually limiting your vision range. However, in my case, I actually don't think this part of the frames are very useful to me. Indeed, this actually helps me because some of the information displayed here, for example, the contribution points or the energy, is hard to see when you have a very bright background. In my case, since this is a living room setup, I'm actually quite far from the TV, so the small numbers here and the bright background actually makes this pretty hard to read. So I quite like this option. If you move this around, let's take it here. Right now we're around 120 frames. If we move it here and click on apply, you're going to see that this frame actually gets smaller, but again, you get less frames per second. So that's actually, you're going to have to decide on this. I actually like it pretty much here, so I'm going to keep it there. And let's see how this is looking. So as you can see, the game looks pretty good. We are still over 120 frames per second, and we are still on 4K. Well, kind of. Let's change these back. Okay, there you go. 4K, and we are around 120 frames. So this is actually pretty good. Remember, this is on remastered, so we actually have a pretty good quality in image. And this one is going to be the non-PvP profile. Now, the way to save profiles, once you're happy with all the changes you've done, you could come here on display settings, open the game window, and you're going to get these two options here. So if you click on this one, it's going to save your current settings in the first slot. If you click on this one, it's going to save them on the second slot. So I usually use the first one for non-PvP and the second one for PvP. So once we have saved that, let's do the changes for the PvP profile. What I like to do here is actually base my profile on one of the default profiles that the system has. So let's choose this one because it's the one that's going to give us more frames per second, and we're going to do some changes over it. Okay, so as you can see, it doesn't look very good anymore, but we're actually getting a lot of frames here, and we can actually make this a little better. So let's see what we have here. Full screen, yeah, this is good. Crop mode, yeah, I definitely want to keep the crop here. If we go to display quality, so what this does here, by default it takes the texture quality to the lowest end and the graphics to very low. We can actually tweak this a little more to get more frames and make it look a little better. So if we put this on high and this on lowest optimal and then click apply, you're going to see we're actually going to squeeze a few more frames per second, and the quality of the image is not that bad. So it's a good trade-off. Okay, so right now anti-alias is not applied. We'll leave it like that. We don't need this here. Faraway objects. That depends on what kind of PvP are you going to do. So if you're going to do the red battlefield, this is not so helpful. If you're going to be on Siege or Node Wars, then this might be a little more helpful. In my case, I'm just going to leave it off. Depth of field, just leave it off. Faraway NPCs, again, this depends on what kind of PvP you're going to engage into. Heat effect, that's always good. Show blood splatter, yeah, definitely. Blood stains as well. And under optimization, again, we're going to have this on the lower end. Remove others' effects. Now this is a tricky one again. If you actually remove the effects, they will be completely invisible, and that will make your fighting against other players way harder. So I don't usually use this. Remove faraway faraway effects. This actually helps a lot if you're going to be engaging in closer PvP. If you're going to be fighting a lot of players like Red Battlefield or Node Wars, then you might actually want to keep this one. But it's always a trade-off, right? It depends. So if you actually need more attack power, you might want to take this one off. Upscale, of course, we want to keep that. And low power option is off. So these are all the tweaks I do on the image settings. So now let's go and test them outside. Alright guys, it's testing time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go outside where there is an open environment, and that should stress our graphic card a little bit. And then we're going to see how many frames are we getting. So let's try and do that now. Okay, so we dropped from around 125 to around 110, so that's pretty good. That's expected. since the environment now has a lot more information. And the graphics, they just look great. Okay, so let's go to Caltheon. Okay, so out here there's not that many people. Let's see, around 110 to 115 pretty much. Okay, that's pretty good. Still looking very good. Graphic quality in this game is just awesome. So let's go inside and let's see how it behaves with a little more people. Okay, this is pretty crowded, and we're over 100, that's pretty good. Nice. Okay, let's go to Heidel now. Alright. Between 90 and 100 here, and there's quite a lot of people. So this looks pretty good. Let's go all the way up there. Nice, nice. Okay. And remember, we are in remastered mode and in 4K, so this amount of frames is just very good. Let's go to the storage keeper. That should stress our video card just enough. So it's around 100 as well. That's definitely a good one in my book. Okay, so I guess the last thing we have to test is the PvP profile. And we're going to test it here because, well, there's a lot of people, so that should give us a good example of the amount of frames we're going to get in a combat situation. So let's see how this goes. 122, 118, okay. Nice, and keep in mind that places like Red Battlefield are actually optimized for battle, so you're going to get even more frames. But this is a pretty good example of how many frames you should be getting in a combat situation. So I would say this test has been successful, and we can end it now. Oh right, so the last piece of information I have for you today, I'm sure you already know this, but just in case you don't, the way to enable or disable the profiles we just created is through this interface right here. So basically the settings menu, and you're going to have these two. In my case, this one is the non-PvP profile and this is the PvP profile. If I click on this, it's going to lower all the resolution, all the graphical quality, and it's going to increase the frames per second. And if we choose this one again, we are going back to the nice and pretty looking profile. And there you have it. So with that said, that's all the information I have for you today, guys. Thank you very much for watching the video. I really hope this helps. And if there's any other things you know about the settings on the game or in Windows itself to get better frames per second, or if there's any way to optimize what I just did, let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.